Chapter 2. The Empire Strikes Back. Trent's satisfaction was short-lived. The Empire's fleet, though staggered by the initial strike of Project Ember, recovered with unsettling speed. In the command center, alarms blared as data streamed across the screens. Earth's railguns had caused damage, but only to a handful of ships. The rest of the Empire's massive fleet realigned, adapting to the new threat with terrifying efficiency. "Sir, the Empire's ships are reconfiguring their shields," reported Lieutenant Kane, his voice tense. "They've recalibrated. They're blocking out Ember's frequencies." Trent clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "Gimme Torres. We need to adjust Ember's settings. Fast." Down in the lab, Dr. Torres' fingers flew over the controls, her expression a blend of focus and desperation. Trent's voice crackled over her comm. "Lena, they're countering Ember. Can you modulate the output?" She cursed under her breath, her eyes scanning the streams of data. "I'll try, but every modulation risks overheating the system. If we push too far, Ember could collapse, taking our defenses with it." A pause hung heavy between them. Trent knew the stakes. If Ember failed, Earth's last hope would flicker out like a dying ember in the dark. "Do it anyway," he said, his tone soft but unyielding. "We've got one shot at this, and we can't afford to hold back." "Understood," Torres replied, her voice calm despite the tension. She began recalibrating Ember, adjusting the energy output to erratic pulses instead of sustained waves. It was a gamble. If the Empire's tech couldn't predict the random frequencies, Earth might buy itself a few more precious minutes. As she worked, the Empire's next salvo hit, a coordinated barrage that rocked the command center. Trent grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself, watching as Earth's shields flickered dangerously. Several operators let out involuntary gasps, eyes wide as the protective barrier strained under the assault. Shields at 67% and dropping, an officer called out, his face pale. Trent exhaled slowly, his mind cycling through options. Prepared to divert non-essential power to the shields. "We're going to need every bit of energy we have." Meanwhile, Torres' adjustments began to take effect. Ember's pulses surged erratically, lashing out at the Empire's fleet in unpredictable waves. Several ships faltered, their shields momentarily shorting out, leaving them vulnerable to Earth's railgun fire. In quick succession, explosions blossomed across the sky, flashes of orange and red punctuating the void. Back in the command center, the operators cheered, but Trent remained stoic, his focus unyielding. He knew this victory was only a delay, a momentary reprieve. The Empire would adapt again. They always did. "Don't get too comfortable," he said, his voice cutting through the excitement. "This is far from over." Sure enough, moments later, the Empire's flagship responded with chilling precision. Admiral Kale appeared on the main screen once more, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You have underestimated us, human," he sneered. "Your primitive tactics might have delayed our victory, but you cannot prevent it. This resistance is futile." Trent's eyes narrowed. He could feel Kale's contempt radiating through the screen, a palpable arrogance that gnawed at him. But he refused to give the Admiral the satisfaction of a response. Instead, he addressed his team. "Let's show them what primitive really means. Prepare the secondary artillery units. All railguns to focus fire on the flagship." Kale's smirk faded as Trent issued the order, his confidence flickering for just a moment. Earth's railguns shifted, zeroing in on Kale's ship as the command center braced for the counterattack. Outside, the sky lit up with the thunderous blasts of railgun fire. Earth's artillery bore down on the Empire's flagship, unleashing a relentless barrage that forced Kale's ship to retreat, its shields straining under the pressure. For the first time, Trent saw a crack in the Empire's strategy. They weren't invincible. They just hadn't expected humanity's sheer tenacity. But just as the assault seemed to gain ground, the Empire retaliated, launching a wave of drones from within their ranks. Swarming like locusts, the drones descended on Earth's defenses, targeting railgun emplacements with surgical precision. Explosions erupted along the coastline as drones strafed the artillery, their speed and agility overwhelming the static defenses. Sir, we're losing railgun stations, Kane reported, his voice shaking. They're targeting our weapons directly. Trent cursed under his breath, his mind racing to adapt. Redirect all automated turrets to take down the drones. Prioritize defense over offense. We need to protect the last of our artillery. The command center vibrated as drones impacted Earth's defenses, each blast ripping through layers of metal and concrete. The air grew thick with smoke, the scent of burning circuits filling the room as sparks danced along the consoles. Through the haze, Trent's gaze fell on a group of new recruits, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. They'd signed up with patriotic resolve, ready to defend Earth, but nothing could have prepared them for this. He stepped toward them, his voice steady. "Listen up," he said, meeting their gazes. "Fear is normal. It means you understand the stakes. But right now, we need every one of you. Hold your ground. This is our home, and we won't let anyone take it from us." A spark of determination returned to their eyes, a steely resolve that spread through the room like a ripple. Trent's words reminded them why they were here, why they fought. The fear still lingered, but now it was tempered by purpose. Dr. Torres' voice came through his calm, snapping him back to the battle. "Ember's overheating, Trent. I can keep it running for a few more minutes, but then we'll have to shut it down or risk a full system collapse." He weighed her words, glancing at the incoming data. They'd bought themselves a narrow window, but if Ember went offline, their defenses would crumble under the Empire's firepower. He made the call, his voice resolute. "Keep Ember running. This is our best chance." A silence fell over the comm line before Torres replied, her tone resigned but determined. "Understood." Pushing Ember to maximum output. Ember's pulses intensified, unleashing a final surge that tore through the Empire's fleet, destabilizing several ships and leaving them vulnerable. The command center erupted in cheers as a series of explosions lit up the night sky, fragments of alien metal raining down toward the ocean. But as Trent watched the spectacle, a nagging feeling crept into his gut. Kale's ship, the flagship, remained untouched, its shield still holding strong. The Admiral's face reappeared on the main screen, his expression one of dark amusement. "Impressive, Captain," Kale said, a mocking edge in his voice. "You fought well, but the game ends now." Before Trent could react, Kale issued a single command, and a wave of energy surged from his ship, slamming into Earth's defenses. The shields buckled, sparks flew, and the room shuddered as the main power grid began to fail. Trent's voice rang out, steady amid the chaos. "Fallback plan. Get everyone to the underground bunkers. Now!" As officers scrambled to obey, Trent's gaze lingered on the screen, a mix of defiance and grim acceptance in his eyes. This battle was far from over, but he knew they were running out of time. Chapter 3. The Turning Point. The ground trembled as Trent descended into the command bunker, his mind racing to calculate their dwindling options. Earth's defenses were on the brink of collapse, and Ember was holding by a thread. The hum of machinery filled the bunker as dozens of personnel worked furiously, their faces etched with a grim determination. Dr. Torres stood by the console, her hands tense on the controls, while Lieutenant Kane monitored the status of the railguns, his eyes dark with concern. "Status report," Trent demanded, moving to the center of the room. Torres' voice was clipped but controlled. "Ember's at maximum output. The frequency modulation is keeping the Empire's ships at bay, but it won't last. We have minutes, maybe less." Trent nodded, the weight of the situation pressing on him like a vice. He addressed the room. "This is it, everyone. We've fought them to a standstill, but they're not backing down. If we want to survive, we have to take the fight to them." A murmur rippled through the room, filled with fear, but also something else, resolve. They were cornered, but they were human, and that meant they wouldn't give up. "Kane," Trent said, turning to the lieutenant, "what's the status on the remaining railguns? Can we mount a final counterattack?" Kane checked his monitors, biting his lip. "We've got 2 operational. If we funnel all remaining power to them, we might be able to concentrate fire on the flagship. It's risky. The other artillery units are toast, and we're losing more by the minute." "Good enough," Trent replied, his voice steady. Get it done? As Kane moved to reroute power, Torres looked up from her console, her face a mix of exhaustion and defiance. If you're going to take out that flagship, Trent, you'll need more than brute force. We could overload Ember, channel the energy through the railguns. It would boost the impact, enough to punch through even their strongest shields. Trent stared at her, his mind reeling. Overloading Ember was dangerous. It could backfire, blowing out every remaining defense they had. But he saw the fierce determination in Torres' eyes, and he knew she was right. This was their only shot. He nodded slowly. Do it. Torres set to work, her hands a blur on the console. The tension in the room thickened as everyone watched, waiting to see if her gamble would pay off. The monitors glowed with rising energy levels, the hum of Ember growing louder, sharper, until it filled the room with a low, pulsing thrum. Kane, Trent said, his voice low but fierce, prepare to fire on my mark. The monitors flickered, showing the Empire's flagship, a massive, looming shadow against the stars, its shields shimmering with ominous energy. Inside, Admiral Kale watched Earth's last stand with a sneer. He was confident, perhaps too much so, but Trent knew better than to underestimate him. Steady, steady, Trent murmured, watching as the power levels peaked. Every second felt like a lifetime, the tension stretching until it was almost unbearable. And then, at the precise moment when Ember reached its limit, he gave the order. Fire! The railguns erupted with a blinding flash, their power amplified by Ember's raw energy. The pulse shot through space, a concentrated bolt of destruction aimed directly at Kale's ship. The shield flared, brightening, as it absorbed the impact, but then, with a sickening crack, it shattered. The flagship shuddered, explosions rippling along its surface as the impact tore through its armor. Inside the bunker, cheers erupted, a wave of relief and triumph that surged through the room. But Trent didn't join them. He was watching the monitors, his gaze fixed on Kale's ship, waiting for any sign that the Empire wasn't finished. And then, through the smoke and fire, Kale's voice crackled over the comms, weak but defiant. You think you can defy us? Humans are nothing, insignificant insects in the vastness of space. You will fall. Trent leaned forward, his voice filled with a fierce, quiet conviction. Maybe we're insignificant to you, Kale. But that's the problem with tyrants. You never see the value of those you crush underfoot. We're not going anywhere. With that, he cut the feed. Kale's flagship was faltering, its engines flickering as the damage took its toll. But Trent knew the Empire wouldn't retreat just because one ship was disabled. This was still a fight for survival. Kane, how long until the flagship systems go offline completely? He asked, his mind whirring with calculations. Kane checked his readings. Looks like they're struggling to maintain power, but they've still got their backup generators. We bought some time, but not much. Trent nodded. Good. Prepare a boarding party. If they won't fall, we'll make them. The order rippled through the bunker, and within minutes, a squad of Earth's best soldiers were suiting up. Trent strapped on his own gear, feeling the weight settle over his shoulders. This was the last move, the final gambit. If they could disable the flagship from within, the Empire's fleet would lose coordination, leaving Earth a fighting chance. As the squad made their way to the shuttle bay, Torres caught Trent by the arm, her eyes intense. Be careful out there. We've come too far to lose you now. Trent gave her a small, reassuring smile. Don't worry, I'm not planning on dying today. The shuttle launch was swift and silent, a dark shape hurtling toward the crippled flagship. Inside, Trent's team prepared for what they knew could be their last mission. Each of them carried the weight of humanity's hope on their shoulders, and it showed in their hardened expressions, in the quiet resolve that filled the small space. As they neared the flagship's airlock, Trent gave one final command. Remember why we're here. For Earth, for everything we've lost, and everything we have left to fight for. The squad nodded, their resolve unbreakable. And as the shuttle docked, they stormed into the flagship, weapons raised, ready to face whatever horrors the Empire had in store. Inside, the corridors were eerily silent, the only sound the soft hum of emergency power. Trent moved forward, his senses alert, every nerve on edge. They had only minutes to reach the engine core and disable it before reinforcements arrived. But just as they rounded the corner, Kale appeared, flanked by Empire soldiers, his face twisted in rage. "You think you can simply waltz onto my ship and take it from me?" he snarled, his voice filled with venom. Trent met Kale's gaze without flinching. "We're not here to take anything, just to finish what you started." With that, the two forces clashed, gunfire and explosions tearing through the corridor. Trent's squad fought with a ferocity born of desperation, every shot, every movement calculated and precise. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. And as Trent raised his weapon, aiming for Kale, he knew this was the moment. Humanity's final chance to stand tall or fall. Chapter 1: The Arrival. The silence in the command center felt thick, an eerie calm before the inevitable storm. Rows of screens displayed real-time footage of the massive alien fleet on the edge of Earth's atmosphere, a formation of glittering, cold precision. Captain Elias Trent watched it with unblinking eyes, his hand steady on the edge of the table. He'd seen the footage hours before, but witnessing it in person sent a fresh jolt of fear through him. This was no simple show of force. This was a declaration of conquest. Beside him, Dr. Lena Torres adjusted her glasses, her face pale but composed. "They're early," she muttered, her voice barely audible, laced with a mix of dread and determination. She'd worked alongside Trent in Earth's Defense Coalition for nearly a decade, preparing for a day she'd always hoped wouldn't come. But the Empire's arrival was now a grim reality. Transmission coming through from their flagship reported a young lieutenant from across the room, his voice tight. Trent nodded, his gaze unyielding. "Put it on?" The command center's central screen blinked, and the severe face of Admiral Kale filled the room, eyes cold and utterly devoid of empathy. He was flanked by two guards in metallic armor that gleamed like polished ice. Kale studied them for a moment, almost as if they were insects beneath his gaze. "People of Earth," he began, his voice smooth and chilling. "I am Admiral Kale of the Galactic Empire. We are here to extend our protection and guidance to your planet. You will surrender, comply with our directives, and be granted the opportunity to serve a purpose greater than yourselves. Resist," he let the word hang ominously, "and you will face consequences beyond your imagination." Trent's jaw tightened. He shared a glance with Dr. Torres, who gave him a subtle nod, her fingers fidgeting with a small device in her hands. He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Kale's with a cool defiance. "We don't want war, Admiral," Trent said, his tone low but firm. "But Earth won't submit to threats or domination. If you proceed, you'll find we are not as easy to conquer as you believe." Kale's face twisted into a condescending smirk. "You have no idea what you're facing, human. Your kind has never encountered anything close to our might. We have conquered entire worlds, civilizations far beyond your comprehension. You're primitive, overreaching." A slight smile crossed Trent's lips as he leaned back, unperturbed. "Then consider this your warning, Admiral. You may find we're full of surprises." Without another word, he gestured to the lieutenant, and the screen went dark, leaving the room in a tense silence. For a moment, no one moved, as though bracing themselves for what was to come. Torres turned to him, her face set in determination. "We need to initiate Project Ember now. The longer they linger, the harder it'll be to launch it undetected." Trent nodded, his eyes briefly softening as he looked at her. Project Ember had been Torres' life's work, a weapon designed to exploit the Empire's over-reliance on their energy shield technology. The device was far from ready, but time wasn't on their side. They'd always known that if the Empire ever arrived, humanity would need to strike with every advantage they had, even if that meant risking an untested weapon. "Do it," Trent ordered, his voice firm. "If this is our only chance, we'll take it." Torres slipped away from the command center, leaving Trent and his officers to prepare for the onslaught. He watched her go, a pang of guilt gnawing at him. He knew she'd poured everything into this defense, but it was a dangerous gamble. If Project Ember failed, Earth's last line of defense would crumble. "Sir," one of the officers called out, breaking him from his thoughts. They're mobilizing. The fleet is spreading into an assault formation. Trent nodded, his mind racing. Prepare the defense shields. Get our artillery locked on their lead ships. We may not match them in firepower, but we'll make them work for every inch. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to darken as the Empire's fleet loomed, casting shadows over the land. The first salvo came without warning, a blinding column of energy that struck Earth's shield, reverberating through the atmosphere. The force rattled the building, sending a shudder through everyone inside. All systems holding, sir, the lieutenant reported, his voice wavering slightly. Trent exhaled, steadying himself. The Empire's tactics were swift and brutal, their energy blasts unrelenting. Earth's defense shields were advanced, but he could already see cracks forming in the energy barrier. Keep reinforcing the shields, he ordered, his eyes glued to the screens as the Empire's ships edged closer. And alert the artillery units. They're to fire on my command. Meanwhile, down in the secured lab, Torres worked frantically, adjusting the final calculations on Project Ember's targeting algorithms. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she typed commands into the console, her fingers flying over the keys. She muttered under her breath, pushing away the doubts clawing at her mind. Failure wasn't an option. In the command center, the tension mounted as Earth's artillery began its counterattack. Massive railguns hidden along mountain ranges and fortified coastlines erupted, launching projectiles at the incoming fleet. Explosions dotted the sky as the Empire's ships evaded, their shields absorbing the impacts. Minimal damage, an officer murmured, grimacing. Trent clenched his fists, watching as the Empire effortlessly swatted aside their best weapons. Yet, there was a spark of defiance in his eyes, a resilience that was beginning to seep through the room. This was more than a defense. This was a stand. For Earth. For humanity. Finally, a notification beeped on his console. Project Ember was ready. Dr. Torres, he said over the comms, his voice low but resolute. Execute Project Ember. Let's show them just how primitive we really are. There was a moment of silence, and then her calm voice came through. Activating Project Ember. Hold on tight. In an instant, a surge of energy erupted from Earth's surface, racing toward the Empire's fleet like a wave of fire. The energy collided with their shields, causing a cascade of sparks and chaotic lights as the Empire's advanced technology struggled to adapt. Several ships flickered, their shields destabilizing. For the first time, Trent saw hesitation on the Empire's side. A fierce satisfaction filled him as he watched the flickering lights aboard the ships. He leaned forward, murmuring to himself as Earth's defiance rang out through the void. Let the games begin. Chapter 4. The Final Stand. The corridor blazed with flashes of light as Trent and his team battled through the Empire's guards, each step a hard-fought inch closer to the ship's engine core. Kale's soldiers swarmed, forcing them to duck behind whatever cover they could find, but the humans fought with a ferocity that even the hardened Empire troops had not anticipated. Trent's mind was a focused whirlwind of tactics and instincts. He shouted commands, his voice rising above the gunfire. Hold the line. Keep pushing forward. Lieutenant Kane fired back with sharp precision, taking down 2 guards who had broken from the shadows. Torres stayed close to Trent, her breathing steady, her eyes fixed on the target. Every corner, every meter they covered brought them closer to the engine room, and to their last, best chance to end this war. Finally, they reached the massive doors leading to the engine core. The doors hummed with a menacing energy, reinforced to withstand any attack. Trent pressed his hand against the control panel, but the doors refused to budge. Kane took a step forward, jaw clenched. We'll need explosives to breach this. Just then, Kale's voice echoed down the corridor, cold and mocking. Did you really think I'd leave my core unprotected? Your defiance is admirable, but it's hopeless. Trent turned, and there was Kale, flanked by a fresh squad of Empire guards. His uniform was scorched, his expression twisted with fury, yet he wore a twisted smile. You're not the first to try this, Kale sneered, drawing a weapon with a flourish. But I promise you'll be the last. Trent met Kale's gaze, his own voice steady with grim resolve. You should know by now that humans don't give up, and we don't back down from tyrants. In the tight space, the fighting became close quarters, brutal and raw. Kane fired a shot that sent one of Kale's guards reeling, while Torres took down another with a precise strike to the helmet. Trent faced Kale, their eyes locked, each understanding that this was the final confrontation. Kale struck first, his movements calculated, yet ferocious. Trent barely deflected a blow that would have knocked him off his feet. Kale followed up with a swift, punishing strike, aiming for a vulnerable spot in Trent's armor. Trent countered, grabbing Kale's arm and twisting it back, his muscles straining as he fought to keep his balance. Is this all you've got, human? Kale taunted, even as he struggled to break free. More than enough, Trent replied, driving his shoulder into Kale's chest and knocking him back. Kale stumbled surprised, and for a split second, his face flashed with fear. Trent took advantage of the opening, raising his weapon. But Kale was quick, swiping a blade from his belt and slashing at Trent's arm. Pain shot through Trent, but he forced himself to focus, to ignore the hot sting and keep fighting. Around them, the corridor erupted in chaos. Torres and Kane fought fiercely, their movements a blur as they held off the guards, buying Trent the precious time he needed. Kale lunged again, but Trent sidestepped, using Kale's momentum against him. As Kale stumbled forward, Trent grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. You underestimated us. That was your first mistake. Kale sneered, struggling against Trent's grip. You're a speck of dust in the universe. Nothing more than an inconvenience. Maybe to you, Trent said, his voice a low growl. But to Earth, to my people, we're everything. With a final, powerful shove, Trent released Kale, who staggered back, momentarily dazed. Trent didn't waste a second. He pulled a small, emergency charge from his belt, the last of their explosives. With one glance at Kane and Torres, he made his decision. Get back! Trent yelled, slapping the charge onto the door's control panel. Kane and Torres scrambled for cover as the charge detonated, sending a shockwave through the corridor and blowing the doors open. The blast rocked the ship, alarms blaring as red lights flashed along the walls. Trent and his team surged forward into the heart of the engine room. The core pulsed with a furious energy, its panels flashing as it struggled to maintain the ship's failing systems. Kale stumbled in after them, his expression twisted with rage and desperation. You think this will stop me? I'll rebuild. I'll crush every last human until there's nothing left. Trent turned to him, his face impassive. Not today. With one swift motion, he aimed his weapon at the engine's control panel, firing a shot that sent sparks flying. The core sputtered, its energy surging wildly, and Kale's face fell as he realized what Trent was doing. No! Kale lunged forward, but it was too late. The core systems went critical, the power surging beyond control. Trent turned to his team. Time to go. Now! They bolted for the exit, Kale's voice echoing behind them, filled with a mixture of fury and despair. As they reached the shuttle bay, Trent spared a glance back at the engine room, watching as the core's energy reached a blinding crescendo. Kale's ship was about to go down, and with it, any chance the Empire had of maintaining its grip on humanity. The shuttle doors slammed shut, and they rocketed away from the flagship just as it erupted in a massive explosion. The blast wave shook the shuttle, but Kane gripped the controls, guiding them through with steady hands. As they cleared the blast radius, Earth's forces erupted in cheers over the comms, a wave of triumphant voices filling the air. Trent leaned back, finally allowing himself a deep breath. Torres was beside him, her eyes shining with relief. We did it. We really did it. Trent gave a tired smile. We didn't just survive, we fought back. From the viewport, they watched as Kale's flagship disintegrated, its remains scattered across the stars. The Empire's fleet, disoriented and leaderless, began to retreat, the remaining ships scattering as Earth's forces closed in. For the first time, humanity had not only survived, they had won. Back on Earth, the celebrations would begin, and the story of their victory would spread. But for now, In the quiet of the shuttle, Trent and his team shared a rare moment of peace, knowing that, against all odds, they had made a stand that would echo across the galaxy.